The sun was going down behind the western ridge when he rode into Caldwell Flats, not dramatically, not the way sunsets get described when people want them to mean something, just the ordinary going down of a sun at the end of a day, the light going orange and then lower, and the shadows stretching out long across the dust of the main street. And into those shadows came a man on a horse that had seen better years, and was managing the current ones with the patient endurance of an animal that has learned not to expect improvement. The man was not much different from the horse in this respect. His name was Cole Hardin, though nobody in Caldwell Flats knew that yet, and nobody in Caldwell Flats was particularly positioned to find out, because the arrival of a dusty man on a tired horse at the end of a working day was not the kind of event that interrupted what people were doing. They registered him the way towns register things that don't require response, peripherally, briefly, filed under the category of drifter and moved past. He rode the length of the main street at the pace of a man who is nowhere specific to be, and is not pretending otherwise. The saddlebags were flat. Anyone who looked, and a few people looked, because flat saddlebags tell a story, and people in frontier towns have learned to read the stories that saddlebags tell, would have understood that what he was carrying was approximately nothing. The bedroll behind the saddle was thin. The rifle in the scabbard was old, but clean, which was the one thing about his outfit that showed consistent maintenance, which told its own story to anyone paying attention. He stopped at the trough outside the livery and let the horse drink. He did not drink himself, which meant he either had water somewhere, or had been without it long enough that the wanting of it had passed into the background where certain wants go when there's nothing to be done about them. He stood beside the horse while it drank and looked at Caldwell Flats with the particular quality of attention of a man assessing a place, not for sentiment, not for familiarity, just for the practical facts of it. What was here, what the state of it was, whether there was work of the kind he was capable of, and whether the kind of people who were here were the kind who might offer it. What he saw was a town that had been through something, not a dramatic something, not fire or flood or a specific catastrophic event. The something that Caldwell Flats had been through was slower and less visible, and in some ways harder to recover from, the gradual, grinding something of a place that has had too many bad years in a row. The buildings were maintained at the level of necessity rather than pride. The few people visible on the street had the specific tiredness of people who are doing what needs doing without quite believing it will be sufficient. The general store had a sign in the window that might once have advertised something, and now advertised nothing, because whatever it had said had faded past legibility. Cole Hardin looked at all of this. He had seen it before, had seen it in a dozen towns across the territory. The particular look of a community that was losing its argument with circumstance. He had ridden past most of them, because a man with nothing is not in an obvious position to help a town with not much more. He was going to ride past this one, too. He finished watering the horse and turned toward the road that led out the east end of town. He got 20 yards before he stopped. He was not entirely sure why he stopped. He looked back at the town.at, the general store with the faded sign, at the woman who had come out of a building 2 doors down and was carrying something heavy, with the posture of someone who has been carrying heavy things alone for too long, at the boy of about 10, sitting on the step of what appeared to be a closed business, doing nothing, with the particular stillness of a child who has nowhere specific to be and has not yet decided whether this is freedom or its opposite. He stopped. He turned the horse around. He rode back to the livery and asked the man inside if there was work available in exchange for a stall for the horse and a corner of the barn for himself. The liveryman, a compact, careful man named Abe Morse, looked at him for a long moment. "What kind of work?" he said. "Whatever kind needs doing," Cole said. Abe Morse looked at the flat saddlebags and the tired horse and the man who had turned around for no obvious reason and come back. "I've got fence posts that need setting," he said. "North side." "I can set fence posts," Cole said. "I figured," Abe said. "Corner of the barn's yours. Horse gets the install." Cole nodded. He unsaddled the horse. He did not know. Standing in the livery of Caldwell Flats, with nothing in his saddlebags, and no particular plan beyond the next morning's fence posts, that he had just made the decision that was going to change both his life and the town's. He would not have described it as a decision. In any case, he had simply stopped riding away. He did not talk about himself. This was not unusual. There were many men in frontier towns who did not talk about themselves. Men whose histories were their own business, and who kept them that way with the consistency that discouraged inquiry. Cole Hardin was one of these men, and Caldwell Flats, being a town with its own preoccupations, did not press, but he had a past, the way everyone has a past, present in the way he did things, visible to people who paid the right kind of attention, readable, if you knew what you were reading. He had been, until 6 years ago, a man with things, not wealth. Not by any expansive definition, but the solid, specific things that constitute a life built with intention. A ranch in the hill country south of the Cimarron, 200 acres of decent ground that he had worked for 8 years into something that produced reliably and would produce more reliably in the years ahead, if the years ahead went reasonably well. A wife named Sarah, who had the quality of certain people who make the space around them better, without drawing attention to the making of it. A daughter, 4 years old at the end, whose name had been Anna, and who had her mother's eyes and his stubbornness, and who had, and for years, become the organizing principle of everything he did and intended to do. A fever had taken Sarah first. In the spring of the 6th year, Anna had followed. In the same week, because a 4-year-old has limited resources against what takes a grown woman, and the resources had not been sufficient, he had buried them on the east side of the property, where the land rose and you could see a long way. Because Sarah had liked to see a long way, he had continued working the ranch for 2 years after, not because he wanted to, but because continuing was the only motion available, and stopping was not something he was prepared to examine. He had worked it with the mechanical thoroughness of a man performing actions whose meaning has been suspended, doing the right things in the right order, achieving the right outcomes from inside. A silence that had nothing to do with quiet. The ranch had been taken from him in the 4th year, after, not by fraud, not by violence, but by the patient arithmetic of drought and debt, and a bank that had the legal standing to do what it did, and used it. He had signed the papers with the same mechanical thoroughness he'd brought to everything in those years, and had ridden out on the horse that was now in Abe Morse's stall. He had been riding since, not toward anything. That was the honest accounting of it, away from the specific geography of loss, which was the only motion that had felt available, and which had become, over 4 years, simply the shape of his existence. One town, then another, work where work was available, the daily business of a man who is alive without having particularly decided to be, and who manages this situation through the dignified medium of keeping busy. He had a kindness in him that the years had not removed. This surprised people sometimes. The men he worked alongside, who expected the exterior to match the interior, and found instead that the cold-looking man did the unexpected thing with a consistency that was eventually not unexpected at all. He helped without being asked, and without making anything of the helping. He fixed things that weren't his responsibility to fix. He gave the last of things when the last of things was what someone else needed. He did these things not from philosophy, but from something more fundamental. The ingrained habit of a man who had, before the losses, lived in the daily practice of caring for others, and whose hands and instincts had retained that practice even when his heart had lost the thread of why. In Caldwell Flats, he set the fence posts on the first day and did the next thing on the second day, and the thing after that on the third, and by the end of the first week, he was still there, which surprised him as much as it surprised Abe Morse. Caldwell Flats had been losing its argument with circumstance for 3 years. The drought had started at 2 dry summers in a row, the kind that don't just reduce yields, but reach into the soil and take something that takes seasons to come back. The ranchers had absorbed the first year with the stoic practicality of people who have dealt with bad years before, and understand them as the cost of the business. The second year had been harder to absorb. The third year, which was the year Cole Hardin rode in, was the year that the absorbing had reached its limit, and what was left was the question of what came next. 3 families had left since spring. Not dramatically, not the loaded wagon and tearful farewell of legend, but the quiet, practical departure of people who had done the arithmetic and found that the arithmetic did not support staying. Their properties sat empty at the edges of the valley, the buildings beginning the gradual process of returning to the land that empty buildings undertake. The ones who remained were the ones who had more reasons to stay than to go, which was not the same as having sufficient reasons, and the distinction showed in the quality of their days. Martha Elgin ran the general store alone since her husband's death 2 years ago, managing it with the focused efficiency of someone who cannot afford to be anything other than focused and efficient, which left no room for the grief that was also present, but was conducted, necessarily, in the time left over from everything else. The Harlow family, father, mother, 3 children, ran the largest remaining ranch with the missing piece. Tom Harlow had broken his leg in June and it had healed wrong, which meant the work he'd done was now being done by his wife Clara and their eldest boy, who was 15 and doing a man's work with the 15-year-old's body and was aging faster than 15-year-olds should be required to age. Pastor Elias Webb ran the church, with the congregation that had shrunk to the point where the church's practical function as the social and spiritual center of the community was strained by the reduced number of people available to center around. These were the people of Caldwell Flats, and what they needed was not a hero. Heroes were for stories, and they knew they were not in a story. What they needed was the ordinary, practical, unglamorous thing of someone showing up and doing something useful. Cole Hardin showed up and did something useful. He finished the fence posts for Abe Morse and then asked, without particular agenda, whether Abe knew of anyone in town who needed work done. Abe, who was a practical man, gave him a list. The list kept him busy for 2 weeks. He fixed Martha Elgin's roof, which had been losing its argument with the weather since spring. He did this without being asked. He had seen it from the street, had assessed it as something that needed doing, and had gone to Martha Elgin and told her he would do it in exchange for store credit, which she had accepted with the slightly startled gratitude of someone who has stopped expecting help and receives it as a surprise. He spent 3 days at the Harlow Ranch, helping with the work that Tom's bad leg had left undone. He worked alongside Clara Harlow and the 15-year-old, whose name was James, with the easy, uncomplaining competence of someone who knows ranch work from the inside and requires no instruction and generates no drama. Tom Harlow watched from the porch where his leg required him to sit and said, on the second evening, that he didn't know what to pay him. Nothing, Cole said. Your boy's been working too hard. Consider it help with that. Tom Harlow looked at him. I don't know you, Tom said. Why are you doing this? Cole thought about it honestly. Your fences needed mending, he said. I can mend fences. Tom Harlow looked at him for a long moment. That's not an answer, he said. It's the one I have. Cole said. He went back to work. The barn raising happened in the 5th week. It started as a practical necessity. The Alderman barn, on the south side of the valley, had finally surrendered to the combination of age and 3 dry years that had dried the timber past what timber is meant to tolerate, and had come down in a way that was not dramatic, but was complete. Without the barn, the aldermans were in a specific kind of trouble that would become a different and worse kind of trouble. Before winter, Cole had assessed the situation and gone to Abe Morse and said that a barn raising required more than one man, and that he would organize it if Abe would help him talk to the right people. Abe had looked at him. You've been here 5 weeks. Abe said. I know, Cole said. Nobody here knows you. Abe said. They know me enough, Cole said. I fixed Martha Elgin's roof. I helped the Harlows. People talk. They do, Abe said. He paused. What do you need from me? Help getting the word out, Cole said. And your wagon. The barn raising drew 14 people, which was most of the able-bodied population of Caldwell Flats, and which surprised Cole less than it surprised the aldermans, who had not asked for help, and had not expected it, and received it with the stunned gratitude of people to whom unexpected goodness has become unfamiliar, enough to be disorienting. It took 2 days. On the first day, the work was the work, the physical, collective effort of people doing a large thing together, which has its own quality of satisfaction, regardless of the individuals involved. But by the afternoon of the first day, something else was also happening, which was the thing that collective physical effort produces when it goes on long enough. Conversation. The specific kind that happens when people are working side by side, and the work creates a context for talking that ordinary social interaction doesn't always provide. People talked to each other who hadn't talked in months. Martha Elgin and Clara Harlow, who had both been managing difficult situations largely alone, discovered in the course of the afternoon that they had been managing adjacent difficult situations, and that the adjacency might be useful. Pastor Webb, who had been trying to maintain the community's cohesion with the shrinking congregation, found that the barn raising was doing in 2 days what his sermons had been attempting for months. James Harlow, the 15-year-old, who had been aging too fast, spent an afternoon working alongside 3 other boys his age, and was, by the end of it, visibly 15 again. Cole moved through all of this without being the center of it, which was the right way to move through it. He was not building community, he was building a barn, and the community was building itself in the space that the barn building created, which was how it was supposed to work. On the evening of the second day, when the barn was done, and the aldermans were standing in front of it with expressions that had not yet settled into any single emotion, their youngest child, a girl of about 7 named Lily, came to stand beside Cole. She stood there. For a moment, he looked at her. She had her mother's eyes and a directness about her that reminded him of something he had been careful not to be reminded of. "Are you going to stay?" she said. He looked at the barn, at the people around it, beginning the particular winding down of a community event. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I hope you stay," she said, with the simple directness of a child who has not yet learned that expressing hope is a vulnerability. He looked at her. He said nothing, but something in the region of the drawer he had kept closed for 6 years did the thing it had been doing increasingly. In the week since he had turned the horse around at the east end of Caldwell Flats and ridden back, Donovan Hatch arrived in Caldwell Flats on a Thursday morning in the 8th week of Cole's stay, and the arrival had the quality of things that have been coming for a while and have finally arrived. Not a surprise, exactly, but the realization of a possibility that the town had known was possible and had been hoping would not materialize. Hatch was a landman, not in the legal sense, or not only in the legal sense, which was the source of his effectiveness. He operated in the space between what the law permitted and what it prevented, and he had been operating there long enough to know exactly how wide that space was, and how much could be done within it. He had been acquiring land in the valley for 2 years, not through fraud, not through force, but through the patient accumulation of debt, and the patient waiting for debt to become property, which was a process he was very good at, and that the drought had made considerably easier. He arrived with 2 men and a leather case full of documents and the manner of someone who has done this before and found it straightforward. He went to the Harlow Ranch first. Cole was there. When Hatch arrived, he had been helping James with the morning work, which had become a regular arrangement, and he stood at the corner of the barn and watched Hatch present Tom Harlow with documents, and Tom Harlow's face do the specific thing that faces do when they are receiving information they understood was coming and had hoped would not. He watched Clara Harlow come out of the house and stand beside her husband and read the documents over his shoulder. He watched her face, too. He went to Martha Elgin's store that afternoon. "Hatch," he said. Martha looked up from her accounts. "You know him?" she said. "I know his type," Cole said. "He's been to the Harlows." "Who else?" Martha looked at the accounts in front of her. The specific, careful accounting of a woman who has been managing on the edge of sufficient for 2 years, and knows the exact shape of the edge. He'll come to me, she said. The store's debt is the kind he buys. Has he approached you? Cole said. Not yet, she said. Cole thought about the documents in Hatch's leather case and the two men who had come with him, and the manner of a man who believes the situation is already resolved. Don't sign anything, he said. I know not to sign anything, Martha said, with the slight sharpness of a woman who has been managing her own affairs for 2 years, and does not require instruction in the obvious. Sorry, he said. I know. He went to see Pastor Webb. Then he went to see Abe Morse. Then he went to see the 3 other families in the valley, whose situations he had learned well enough in 8 weeks to know what Hatch's documents would mean for them. He did not tell them what to do. He told them what he knew about how men like Hatch operated, about the specific legal mechanisms they used, about the difference between what the documents said and what the documents meant, which was often not the same thing. He told them this with the specific, practical knowledge of a man who had been on the receiving end of exactly this process 6 years ago, and had learned it thoroughly. He told them one other thing. He can take 1 ranch, Cole said. Maybe 2, if they're isolated. He can't take a valley that stands together. The arithmetic doesn't work for him if you're 1 unit instead of 6. Tom Harlow looked at him from his position on the porch, the bad leg in front of him. You're asking us to fight, Tom said. No, Cole said. I'm asking you to stand. There's a difference. The meeting happened in the church on Friday evening. Not Cole's doing exactly, but Cole's instigation, which is a different thing. 14 adults in the pews of Pastor Webb's church, with the specific quality of people who have been brought together by a situation, and are determining whether they are going to be brought together by it, or scattered by it. Cole spoke for perhaps 10 minutes. He said what he knew about Hatch's methods. He said what he knew about the legal mechanisms and where they had limits. He said that individually they were each vulnerable, and collectively they were not, and that Hatch knew this, which was why he had been approaching them individually. He said, he's counting on each of you, thinking you're alone in this. You're not alone. You've never been alone. I've been here 8 weeks, and I can see that, even if you can't right now. He sat down. The room was quiet for a moment. Martha Elgin spoke first, then Tom Harlow, from the pew where Clara had helped him sit. Then 3 others. By the end of the evening, what had been 6 isolated situations facing an organized threat had become 1 community facing a situation they had decided to face together, which was a different arithmetic entirely. Hatch came to the church on Saturday morning. He came with his leather case and his 2 men, and his manner of someone who has done this before. And he found Cole Hardin sitting on the church steps. Just Cole. No crowd. No confrontation. Hatch looked at him. Who are you? He said. Nobody specific, Cole said. Just a man who's been in this valley for 8 weeks and has gotten to know the people in it. Hatch looked at the church. I have legal documents, he said. Properly executed. The law is, I know what the law is, Cole said. I also know what the law isn't. He looked at Hatch without hostility, without performance. You've been buying debt in this valley for 2 years. The families here know that. They also know that debt can be restructured, that the specific provisions in your documents have limitations that your documentation doesn't make clear, and that 6 families standing together have a different legal position than 6 families standing alone. He paused. There's a lawyer in the county seat who's been contacted, he said. He'll be here Tuesday. The families have agreed to sign nothing and commit to nothing until he's reviewed the documents. Hatch looked at him. He was doing the arithmetic. Cole could see it. The rapid calculation of a man determining whether the situation he'd arrived expecting was the situation that was actually present. I have legal standing. Hatch said. You have some legal standing, Cole said. How much is what the lawyer will determine? I think you know that the answer is less than your documents suggest. Hatch looked at the church. He looked at Cole. He was a practical man, which was both his greatest asset and, in this moment, the thing that made the next part possible. Practical men, when the arithmetic changes, change their approach. A restructured arrangement, Hatch said. For the debts. That's the conversation to have with the lawyer, Cole said. And with the families. Together. Hatch looked at him for a long moment, then he nodded. Once, briefly, the nod of a man acknowledging a changed situation, without conceding more than acknowledgement requires. He went to arrange a meeting with the lawyer. Cole sat on the church steps in the Saturday morning sun and looked at Caldwell Flats, the main street, the buildings, the people who were beginning to appear and go about their Saturday with something slightly different in the quality of their movement. Not relief, exactly. The situation with Hatch would take weeks to resolve completely, and the drought was not resolved at all. But something. The something of people who have discovered that they are not alone. Lily Alderman came running down the main street with the urgent purposefulness of a 7-year-old who has somewhere specific to be. She stopped at the church steps. She looked at Cole. Did it work? She said. It's working, he said. It'll take a while. She nodded seriously, accepting this as the kind of answer that adults give when things are complicated. Mama says you can have supper with us tonight, she said. He looked at her. Tell your mama thank you, he said. You should come and tell her yourself, she said. He looked at the main street. The town. That was not fixed, not saved, not transformed by any dramatic event. Just slightly more itself than it had been, slightly more capable of being itself. Because something that had been isolated had been connected. All right, he said. Tell her I'll come. He stayed through the winter. This had not been the plan. There had not been a plan, exactly, which was perhaps how it was possible to stay through the winter without having decided to. One day followed another, and each day had something in it that was connected to the previous day and the day before that. And the accumulation of days became a season without his having made a specific decision about it. The lawyer came on Tuesday and reviewed Hatch's documents and confirmed what Cole had told the families, that the legal position was more complicated than Hatch had presented, and that the complications, properly addressed, gave the families considerably more room than they'd believed they had. The restructuring took 3 weeks, and was not everything the families had hoped for, and was considerably better than what Hatch had arrived expecting to offer. Hatch left Caldwell Flats with less than he'd come for. Cole spent the winter doing what he'd been doing since the first fence posts, the available work, the practical help, the steady presence of a man who had been nowhere specific and had, somehow, arrived somewhere specific without traveling there intentionally. He ate at the Aldermans on Sundays, which had become the arrangement, with Lily conducting the conversation with the focused relentlessness of a 7-year-old who has decided that someone is worth knowing and is going to know them thoroughly. He played cards with Abe Morse on Thursday evenings, badly and without improvement, which Abe found satisfying. He sat with Tom Harlow on the Harlow porch in the evenings when Tom's leg was bad, and the sitting was what the evening called for. And they talked in the way of men who have found that they have things to say to each other, which is not something either of them had expected. He helped James Harlow with the work, and, gradually, with other things. The conversation about what came after 15, after the ranch, after the specific horizon of a young man's particular circumstances. He was not a father, not a mentor in any formal sense. He was a man who had found that there was a 15-year-old who needed someone to talk to, and had been available to be talked to. He thought about Anna sometimes, not with the specific, devastating weight of the early years, with something that had shifted, still present, still the precise and irreplaceable reality of a person who had existed and was gone, but carried differently now, carried as part of what he was rather than as the definition of what he'd lost. He understood, in the way that certain understandings arrive not as revelations, but as the quiet confirmation of something already known, that the carrying had changed, because he had stopped moving fast enough to put it somewhere. It couldn't reach him. He had stopped moving. He had been still long enough to find out what was here. What was here was Caldwell Flats, imperfect and struggling and full of people who were doing their best with what they had, and who had, over the course of a winter, become people he knew, and who knew him, which was a different thing from the town he had ridden into in the fall. In the spring, when the roads were open and the first real warmth was in the air, He saddled his horse one morning. Not to leave, or not only to leave. To think. The long rides he had been taking since the first weeks, through the valley and the hill country above it, had become his way of thinking. The motion of the horse being the particular motion that his particular mind required. He rode up to the ridge above the valley. He stopped and looked down at Caldwell Flats. He could see the alderman barn from here, the one they had built together in the fall. He could see the Harlow Ranch, where the work was going better this year, the season being better. He could see the main street and Martha Elgin's store, and the church where Pastor Webb's congregation had grown back to, something that justified the building. He looked at all of this for a long time, he thought. About 4 years of riding away from things. He thought about the east end of Caldwell Flats, and a tired horse, and a moment when he had stopped. He thought about flat saddlebags, and how they were not the same as empty, because empty meant nothing, and flat just meant you hadn't filled them yet with the things worth carrying. He rode back down. He unsaddled the horse. He went to find Abe Morse. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. Abe looked at him. "Are you leaving?" Abe said. "No." Cole said. "I'm not leaving." Abe looked at him for a long moment. "About time you said that," he said. He never owned much. This remained true of Cole Hardin even after he stopped leaving the specific accumulation of a man who had learned, through loss, that the things worth having were not the things that could be taken. He had a job at the livery, which Abe Morse had been offering him since the second month, and which he finally accepted in the spring, which was work he was good at, and that suited the particular rhythm of his days. He had a room above the livery, which was not large, but was his, and was warm, and was in a building full of animals, who did not require him to be anything other than competent and consistent, which was a quality of company he had come to value. He had the people of Caldwell Flats, which was the thing that could not be inventoried, but was the largest thing. He had Lily Alderman's Sunday conversation, which continued to be conducted with the relentless thoroughness of a child who has decided that everything about a person is worth knowing, and who, by the end of the second year, had come very close to the everything of Cole Hardin, which was more than most people had managed. He had James Harlow, who in the second year, decided to stay on the ranch rather than the other thing he'd been considering, and who told Cole that the deciding had been influenced by a winter of conversations on the Harlow porch, which Cole received with the specific awkwardness of a man who did not know what to do with the information that he had been useful to someone in a way that mattered. He had Tom and Clara Harlow, who had him for dinner on Thursdays and who had settled into the relationship with him that certain people settle into. Not dramatic, not declared, just present and consistent, and better than the alternative of its absence. He had Martha Elgin, who had opinions about everything and expressed them, and was usually right, and who had decided, with the focused efficiency she brought to everything, that Cole Hardin was someone worth including in the practical fabric of her days. He had Abe Morse's Thursday card games, which he continued to lose with an equanimity that suggested he had either accepted the losing or was not actually trying, and Abe suspected the latter, but couldn't prove it. He had Pastor Webb's congregation, which he attended with the irregular but genuine commitment of a man who has found that the community of a church is worth something independent of the specific theology, which Pastor Webb had decided was sufficient and had stopped pressing for more. Years passed in the way that years pass when you are present in them rather than moving through them, slowly, in the sense that each day was full enough to be noticed, and quickly in the sense that the fullness made the retrospective accounting of the time surprising. Caldwell Flats did not become a prosperous town, exactly. It became something better than that, a viable town, a town that had found its footing after 3 bad years, and had learned something in the finding that made the footing more solid than it had been before. The drought ended. The families that had stayed built what they had back up, incrementally, in the patient way of people who have decided that the place is worth building. 3 new families arrived, which brought the population to something that made the church feel full again, and the general store feel busy. Cole Hardin was part of all of this, in the specific, unspectacular way of someone who shows up and does the available work, and is present for the available life. Not a hero, not a legend, not the subject of stories told to strangers. Just a man who had been going somewhere else and had stopped here instead, and had found out that here was where he was supposed to be. He thought sometimes about the man who had ridden into the east end of town on a tired horse with flat saddlebags and nothing in particular to offer. He thought about what that man had been carrying that he hadn't known he was carrying, the capability for this, the specific capacity to be part of a community and to be useful in it and to give what he had, and to find that the giving came back in forms he hadn't anticipated. He had been carrying it through 4 years of riding away, unused, available, waiting for him to stop long enough to offer it. He had stopped. He looked at Caldwell Flats from the livery door in the mornings, the way he looked at it every morning, at the main street and the buildings and the people going about their days, and felt the specific feeling of a man who knows where he is and knows why he is there, and finds both of those things sufficient. He was not a rich man. He had no land, no cattle, no ranch, no material thing of particular value. He had everything that mattered, which turned out to be, when you arrived at it, honestly, more than enough. The richest person, he thought, is not the one who has the most it, the one who has learned what most is, who has held enough real things. A barn built together, a child's Sunday questions, a Thursday card game, a conversation on a porch in the evening, to know the weight of them, and who has understood, not from wisdom, but from the specific education of loss and return, that the weight of real things is not a burden. It is what you feel when you are alive. Fully, finally, actually alive. In a place. With people. With enough. If this cowboy story reminded you that true wealth comes from kindness, courage, and the people we choose to help, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Broken Spur Stories for more emotional Western stories inspired by the Old West. Every week, we bring you unforgettable cowboy stories filled with redemption, hope, frontier adventure, and life lessons that stay with you long after the story ends. Share this video with someone who believes that even after losing everything, it's always possible to find what truly matters. And tell us in the comments, what do you think is the greatest treasure a person can have?